2019 was a much better year for games than I feel like a lot of people are giving it credit for. Sure, there's been a bit of that expected lull in major first party games due to the impending release of new consoles, but I think that third party publishers and independent developers have done a fantastic job of picking up the slack. I never really felt there was a time this year where I had absolutely nothing new to play. I was always busy playing something fresh and interesting, and I think that's a perfectly good bar for the industry to aim for. Luigi's Mansion is probably Nintendo's weirdest ongoing series, an entire standalone franchise centered around Luigi, the worse brother, doing a Ghostbuster impersonation. And what's weirder than the fact that it exists is that it works incredibly well. This latest entry has everything you've come to expect from the series, with pretty similar ghost murder mechanics to its predecessors, but it also adds an excellent co-op mode and a handful of iterative mechanics that add quite a bit to the core gameplay. But as always, it's the charm of this series that really carries it over the finish line, and Luigi's Mansion 3 has buckets of it, which often help to make up for shortcomings the game has around some of its boss fights and its lock-on controls. There's a lot of things that work against Jedi Fallen Order. Technically speaking, it's kind of a mess. Even if I did seem to run into fewer issues on PC than other people seem to encounter on consoles. But in a year where I found myself bouncing off of From Software's Souls-like experience due to just not being able to focus on it, Fallen Order provided a fun version of that experience, smothered in an appreciable but not excessive level of Star Wars fan service. Sure, it may have taken cranking the game up to its highest difficulty level to get close to the sort of challenge I was looking for, but I ultimately enjoyed the game more than I was expecting, a Souls-light experience, if you will. I've looked at quite a few different puzzle games on this channel over the years, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that making something new and interesting in the space is extremely difficult. In recent years, I've always been interested to see what Zachtronics is doing, but Baba Is You takes that Zachtronics type of puzzle game, that philosophy, and gives it a ton more mass appeal with its aesthetic. Basic logic puzzles turn into mind benders, which eventually become massive and confounding levels. But every step of the way, you're learning new things about how the game works, which, while it probably makes the game nigh impossible to pick up after a long time away from it, makes you feel amazing as you work your way through it and solve the progressively more complex puzzles it's throwing at you. I don't think I would have ever foreseen putting a remake on my top 10 at all, much less at a number 7, but here we are, and Resident Evil 2 is so much unlike its ancestor that it has more than deserved it. This game took the base story and rough outline of Resident Evil 2 and built almost an entirely new game around it, one that feels exactly like what I want from a modernization of Resident Evil. From the scares, to the way the game plays, to the way the map works. It's been truly amazing to watch Capcom absolutely knock it out of the park with these Resident Evil games as of late, and I couldn't be more excited to check out Resident Evil 3 in a few months. The Outer Worlds probably made the best first impression of any game on my list this year. I'm a huge fan of the Bethesda style of role-playing game, and I particularly loved Fallout New Vegas. In the early parts of the game, I felt like it was going to even surpass those, and become my favorite in the genre. I still clearly think this is a fantastic game if it's this high on my top 10 list, but ultimately it falls a little flat after Monarch. The slow pace of that planet gave way to a mad dash to an unsatisfying finish. The characters are amazing and probably this game's biggest redeeming quality. But when the game made me feel like I was actually having a gradual impact on the people in the world, I loved it. But in its latter half, it's in such a rush to get to the end that your choice's binary nature becomes deeply transparent, and the sudden shift towards more and more combat-centric areas left me kind of bored. Still, what this game does well around its writing and its characters, it does extremely well, and I'm excited to see what they can do with a little more focused DLC. Deck building games have always been some of my favorites, long before I even started playing their computerized versions. These days, I've invested more time into Hearthstone and Magic the Gathering Arena than any sane person should, but in addition to those eternally evolving and expanding games, sometimes it's awesome to just have something self-contained, with less grinding for new cards to build decks, and more just enjoying playing the game with the cards that already exist. Slay the Spire does exactly that as a hybrid card game and dungeon crawler with a sprinkling of roguelite elements. Each deck feels like you're almost playing an entirely different card game with vastly different focuses and unique play styles for each different class, and the game itself is challenging enough without being too punishing if you don't manage to get perfect luck as you progress through the dungeon. Like a lot of people, I've been playing this game since it was first released in early access a few years ago, but with its full release this year, I finally felt free to really throw myself into it without worrying about the game changing drastically, and I still love it every bit as much as I did 2 years ago. Nintendo isn't really known for publishing games with well-written characters. There's been exceptions, but most times they've tried, it's been an unmitigated failure. But Fire Emblem games have been one of those long-running exceptions, and Three Houses has some of the best writing of any of them yet. Each individual student you have in the game is unique, with their own personality and story that really endears you to them, and it's a bit of a shame the game forces you to choose so early before you get to know them. Nevertheless, each of the game's 3 separate houses, each which represents its own path, has their own distinct story and personality, making having several different playthroughs way more appealing than Fire Emblem Fate's ridiculous multi-game purchase system and completely unknown and unfamiliar other sides of the conflict did. You get to know everyone before the game splits you up, so you always want to see what it looks like from their side because you still know them. You also get essentially the same good Fire Emblem combat we've always gotten, though you should make sure you set the difficulty up somewhat high when you start, since, for whatever reason, the game doesn't allow you to raise the difficulty after you start, only lower it, so it's better to be able to drop the difficulty down to a point where you're comfortable than to be bored eternally on a lower difficulty. When Remedy games are good, they really hit me on all fronts. Excellent top-notch writing, fun gameplay, incredible cutting-edge graphics, and amazing art direction. Control is all of those things and more. As a huge Remedy fan from the days of Max Payne, Quantum Break was a massive disappointment a few years ago, but Control more than makes up for it. Set at the intersection of the paranormal and government bureaucracy, and taking place in an ever-changing building full of imposing, beautiful, brutalist architecture, Control is interested in how the government might deal with paranormal events happening in the world, the logistics of hiding those occurrences, and studying the powerful objects that those events sometimes generate. Since everything has gone to hell by the time you arrive, you're reading about this through endless reams of redacted documents that I went well out of my way to find and read every single one of. But while the world is the game's main asset, it's also Remedy's best playing game since Max Payne 2, a perfect melding of gunplay and supernatural abilities like telekinesis and flight. And if all that wasn't enough, this game was also the first truly impressive demonstration of NVIDIA's ray tracing technology on the PC, where it made panes of glass eye-catching distractions. The game can be a bit difficult at times and has no difficulty settings, which I know has made it a bit frustrating for some people, but the game's world, story, and even its characters are full of that trademark Remedy charm, and well worth fighting through for. Disco Elysium is a game that came out of nowhere for me, and it's been kind of a revelation as to what's possible in video game storytelling. Sure, it uses the template set out for it by its predecessors in the CRPG space, specifically games like Planescape Torment, but its writing and role-playing systems make it absolutely unparalleled. Not a lot of other games will let you put points into skills that allow you to have more in-depth conversations with different parts of your subconscious. The level of player choice here is not only huge, but actually affects the game. You can easily miss out on giant parts of the plot or entire characters if you fuck something up bad enough. And unlike a lot of other games where I would probably just reload a save until I succeeded at whatever it was I was trying to do, roll some dice in the right way so that I'm fine, more often than not, I just went along with it. I found the game to be much more enjoyable when you just rolled with the punches and let it tell a story. The detective you're playing as is always going to kind of be a colossal fuck-up no matter what you do. But you can always make the effort to try and improve him, or just let him wallow in his own self-pity. Oh, by the way, there's a murder mystery going on here, and honestly, it's kind of a rote detective story. Sure, it has the requisite number of twists and turns along the way, but I found interacting with the characters in this world to be far more interesting than the story itself. And to its credit, the story gives you plenty of chances to do just that. And all those characters are contained in a pretty small world. The whole game takes place over just a few city blocks, but those blocks are painstakingly rendered in excruciating detail, making me realize that I'd much rather have a small, detailed world when it comes to these sorts of games than a huge, sprawling one. It's just more believable that you're having an effect on the people living here, and it allows them to really just focus in on making what's there good. You don't have to build giant deserts between two towns. Just put the towns right next to each other. I don't need the desert. If Disco Elysium was this year's master of dialogue and writing, Outer Wilds is a perfect companion piece. A master of showing, not telling. Sure, the game still has a lot of text to read and the messages left behind by the mysterious precursor race, but the game's most important moments are shown to you in absolutely stunning fashion. A lost starship you've been reading about in message after message that has long since fallen into legend in the myths of this precursor race. You've found it, and the feeling I had in that moment was one of joy, but also of sadness at the slow death of this race over centuries, perhaps even millennia. And there's just moment after moment like that, carefully set up in text entries or dialogue with a limited handful of other characters so that the second you see something, you know exactly what its significance is with no NPC there to tell you why it's important. You already know. The game's time loop is also enormously helpful with exploration. Everything happens at a predictable time within the 22-minute loop. This can lead to some frustrating timing requirements to arrive somewhere before you miss the opportunity to go through a door or to activate a device, but the sense of discovery is well worth it. Everything you find is exciting. And that's what Outer Wilds offers that so few games ever do. A sense of true discovery, almost that of an anthropologist. Someone who has read so much about a long-lost group of people, just to finally have their greatest achievement right in front of your eyes.